Coming up today on The Story.
I've spoken in the chapel time and said we've left a family behind in Australia to come here, but now we're leaving a family behind in Korea to go back to Australia because we live with them, we eat with them, and we teach them, and they do become like our family.
The Story.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Colefax. Welcome to The Story. Well, our guests today have been a global couple right from the very beginning when they met at the Grand Canyon and have been travelling the world ever since. And now, in their retirement years, Aileen and Robin Beiers are combining their travel with doing ministry work, like helping train missionaries in South Korea and teaching English in Lebanon. We'll hear their globe-trotting adventures today on The Story as they have a chat with Shelley Scowen.
You both have really interesting stories as to how you came to realise that you needed Jesus as your own personal saviour. Let's start with you, Aileen. You came from a Christian heritage, but it was only after the birth of your first daughter that you really realised that you needed Jesus.
Yes, I'd gone to church as a child. I'd gone to youth group. I'd done all the right things, and had always thought that had made me a Christian. Then I went overseas for a trip to the UK, a working holiday for a couple of years, and that was when I decided, well, life's much more fun without God, and I drifted right away. And as you said, after the birth of my first child, and I realised that I had this responsibility that I really needed to look at my life and make some changes. And basically, it was still about going back to church. I think I need to go back to church. And so it was still a few years down the track before I realised that it's not about going back to church, that it's actually about a personal relationship. So that took another few years for the penny to finally drop.
Just one of the many ways that becoming a parent changes you inside.
Absolutely.
It's not just the practicalities of having a small person to look out for, but it does make you think about life in a different way, doesn't it?
Yes,
yeah.
It certainly does.
Yeah. So you obviously got involved in a church then and started attending regularly and came to that point of wanting Jesus as your own personal saviour.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Robin, what's your story?
The baby boomers, of which we are two, as children generally kind of went to church in post-war. So I'd certainly been attending church. My mother was a single parent as a result of the war. And we went to a Baptist church. But when I got to university, I really started to see a conflict between science and religion, which I no longer see, actually. But and so I rejected religion and became an atheist. And I started my profession, which was petroleum geology, and I was sent overseas for training. And of course I felt I was very important because that was a very unusual thing to do in the 70s, to be sent overseas for an extended period. So we went as a family, and our first child was born in France. On the way back, we went to Sri Lanka and had a tour. And halfway up and we had a driver and a car, and halfway up into the mountains, a place called Kandy, I became very ill. And I was in my colonial-type hotel, and they had to get a doctor in, and the doctor walked through the door of this huge room. He was pretty talented, I'm sure, but he took one look and knew I had hepatitis. I think my eyes must have been very yellow. So they put me in a hospital and tried to look after me, and I was in that hospital for 17 days. It was, as I said, in the mountains in a place called Kandy, and there was a lake up there and a very famous Buddhist temple. Every day the Buddhist monks would walk by the window of this tiny hospital I was in. And as I lay there and thought about this, I thought, well, it's very interesting. Most of the world believes in God, a God of some form, and I don't. That means they're all really stupid or I'm making a mistake. So statistically, it was probably me. So I came back to Australia and read a lot, read a lot of stuff. And about Christianity, I didn't seek any other religions. And then I made a commitment for Jesus, and I was baptised in the church, a very traditional church. And then we started to get on with our lives and see what came of that.
It's interesting then that for you, Aileen, your salvation was almost caught up in the, well, not caught up in the, but it was based on the emotions of you having your first daughter. Whereas for you, Robin, it was very much a scientific thing, which shows obviously your scientific mind. But, you know, you're looking and going, oh, statistically speaking, one of us is wrong and it's probably me. And let's go and do some research and find out more. It just shows you're a little bit chalk and cheese like that.
I think so, definitely. But
Yes.
yes, but the amazing thing I think was that they both happened at the same time, completely different paths.
Wow.
But at the same time, because when he was so ill in Sri Lanka, I had to come back to Australia because of the baby being so young. Mm-hmm. I couldn't continue to stay in Sri Lanka. And so it was that point where I realised I had this responsibility. And then meanwhile, he was in the hospital having these sort of thoughts. Oh, and wow. So when he finally was released from hospital and came back to Australia, we realised that we'd both come to this kind of conclusion, but completely different paths.
God's pretty good like that, isn't he?
Absolutely.
The way he just leads us on our journey and draws us to him. It's amazing. Robin, I hear that you have quite a story to tell about how the two of you met. Tell us how that happened.
This is a very long story, and Aileen doesn't like it, so I'll keep it very short. Basically, when I graduated, I was employed by an international oil company, and I worked in the jungle of New Guinea. And every day, and this is back in the 60s, every day I spent in the jungle, I got an extra $10 a day. Now, that doesn't sound too much in the 21st century, but in 1967, $10 a day extra in cash was pretty big. So I had a lot of money, and I decided I'd go for a tour of America and visit all the science museums and stuff. So I did that, and being a geologist, I was very interested in the Grand Canyon, so I turned up at the Grand Canyon.
That'd be like heaven for you.
Yeah, well, I don't know about heaven. I don't know whether heaven's the Grand Canyon, but anyway,
rocks everywhere.
Figuratively speaking. But so I was there, and strange to say, there was a blizzard, and the blizzard blocked out the Grand Canyon. You could not see anything. All you could see was white.
Oh.
So imagine, and there's this tour group, assorted people. I just rocked in and booked a day tour, and she'd rocked in separately and booked a day tour. And here's the tour guide. What can he say? He says, well, look, folks, there's the white stuff. So he said, well, where are you all from? You're from Alabama and so on. Anybody from overseas? And I thought, I'm not going to put up my hand. But this girl who was down about 5 or 8 rows down in another part of the auditorium, which was fairly empty, put her hand up and she said, I'm from Australia. And I thought, oh, she looks pretty cute. I'll go and talk to her. So I talked to her. We were going different ways. Those were the days actually where you could get 99 days on the Greyhound for $99.
Wow.
Pretty impressive, yeah. So she went off one way and I thought I'd like to meet her again. So we met. I changed my itinerary. It wasn't anything planned. You could change go anywhere on a Greyhound. So we went back. She was going back to Los Angeles. I went back to Los Angeles. I hadn't seen Disneyland. She convinced me to see Disneyland, and I kissed her on the Peter Pan ride.
Wow. That is an awesome story.
And I was very impressed because I had spent all of my money travelling and was literally sort of living on virtually nothing. And I was so impressed because he could afford to buy a sandwich.
Wow, he must have been rich. A sandwich at Disneyland is a lot of money.
So we travelled, we'd kind of travel with each other. We were not Christians in these days. We travelled each other and met at different places around America. And we said goodbye at Niagara Falls. She went back to London, and you probably understand there's a lot of young men in London, and I went back to the jungles of New Guinea, and you'd probably imagine there are not many young Caucasian women in the jungles of New Guinea.
No.
So there was a little difficulty there. I'd write letters, and sometimes I'd get, and there was no phones, of course, so I'd sometimes get replies.
Okay, so how did you end up meeting up and deciding to get married?
Finally, after 2.5 years, I went back to Australia, and I grew up in Adelaide. So I went back to Adelaide, and he went back to Brisbane, or he was in Brisbane, and he came down to visit, and then I went up to visit Brisbane, and then eventually we decided that we were going to stay together.
Wow. What an amazing story. So you guys have very much been a global couple right from the very beginning. I mean, you met at the Grand Canyon. That is pretty romantic in itself. Saying goodbye at Niagara Falls. And, of course, you know, your separate lives before you even came together, you were, you know, all over the world, here, there and everywhere, which was probably a lot less of a done thing back then. These days, every man and his dog goes travelling. But back then, it was probably a little bit more unique.
It was. It was definitely, yes.
You're listening to The Story. Today, Shelley Scowen is chatting with globe-trotting couple Robin and Aileen Beiers about their story. Next, we'll find out how they've combined their love for travelling with their love for God and serving Him in ministry. That and more when we return.
The Story.